As many of you know, I recently became a parent. I waited longer than many of my friends to start a family because I was smart enough to know what I didn't know about parenting. The irony of that choice is that no amount of knowledge could prepare me for the vulnerability of caring for my child. Parenthood is the great paradox. What you love most is also what terrifies you most. Some people live life being comfortable with their vulnerability, learning how to live with the fear that the things they've grown attached to may one day break or leave. That was not me. Other people are completely uncomfortable with vulnerability and choose to protect themselves by avoiding the things that make them scared. I waited until I could understand myself as the latter and was prepared for the former. In becoming a parent, I discovered the paradox that is at the core of being a parent. The thing we most want often is also the thing that makes us most scared. There are so many reasons that have caused me worry and fear as a parent, and there are just as many that have caused me surprise and joy. Parenthood has also given me an unexpected gift, a deeper understanding of my own parents, one that is rooted in empathy and has led me to forgiveness. We are all just doing the best we can with who we are as a result of what we have lived through. Some of us have found ways to resolve our histories and experiences that have left their mark on our character, and others are still tending to their open wounds. All of us are living through our histories at the same time, but many of us do it alone. Imagine then bringing a baby into the world while enduring life under these circumstances. I have been given an opportunity to think about what it must have been like for my parents when I was born. As a result, I can be more patient and forgive with my parents today. In seeing me with my son, their grandson, my parents have started to recognize the things they wish they had done differently. In their own realizations, I find it easier to forgive. It lifts the burden that I've carried for years and frees me to focus on what's in front of me, not what's behind. This is one of the important lessons for me, that at the core of forgiveness and patience is empathy. But what does that word actually mean, and how do we actually experience it? Empathy is not seeing someone experiencing difficult feelings and wishing they felt better. That observation is sympathy. We sympathize with people who are experiencing something uncomfortable or painful that we can't possibly understand. We can feel bad for someone, but we aren't feeling bad with someone. Instead, empathy is like analogy. The experiences may not look the same, but the emotional outcomes are similar. In recognizing that sameness, we can feel with others, not just for them. And in doing so, we want to see them grow, just as we cringe at our past mistakes but take pride in how far we've come. For those of us who have broken bones in the past or have undergone invasive surgery, a lot of the day-to-day pains we experience pale in comparison to our memory of those moments of suffering. Take my son, for example. He's never had a broken bone or gone through a serious illness, thankfully. So his frame of reference is very different from mine. For him, something like running out of his favorite yogurt feels like the worst thing he's ever experienced. And it is. The worst thing so far. Realizing that makes it easier for me to stay calm while he's screaming. His pain may seem small from my perspective, but it's very real for him. Empathy helps me meet him where he is and respond with patience instead of frustration. Empathy allows me to meet him where he is without judgment. Realizing that makes it so much easier for me to be calm while he is screaming rather than become frustrated. The thing about becoming a parent is that I already knew all of this before becoming a parent. I was aware that I would discover something new about myself, and I was aware that I would have to sit with my own feelings, good and bad, and recognize them as my own without trying to find someone else to blame. So I didn't have to point to myself as the cause of those feelings. I knew that I would be spit up on, peed on, pooped on, and all sorts of other gross things. I knew that I was going to have to remain calm while this adorable creature, new to the world, screamed at me and tore at my beard because he simply didn't like the yogurt we'd prepared him for dinner. What is impossible to anticipate is how any of this would make me feel. For many reasons not worth talking about, I have avoided being vulnerable for most of my life. But in doing so, I have missed some of the things that make life worth living. In the words of Brené Brown, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. Imagine avoiding all of that for 3 decades. Those of you who know me have probably listened to me drone on ad nauseum about some pedantic curiosity that is either boring or confusing, but undoubtedly a little obnoxious. That is my comfort zone, the place of ideas, of techniques, and of words. I have admired others who seem comfortable with the discomfort of feelings, but never eager to dive into them. And yet, in its unfamiliarity, it has always had a curious appeal, like a caveman watching a campfire. Feelings are beautiful and interesting, but every time I get close, I start to get anxious about getting burned. So I've always kept my distance, appreciating the beauty of feelings from afar, but watching others dance around that campfire. The paradox of parenting means I can never not feel that, no matter how far back from the fire I stand. So I decided that I might as well enjoy the warmth that fire brings me, and have some bandages ready just in case. It's not like watching a movie where you can buy the ticket for an hour and a half, knowing you'll just go home, back to your comfort zone after the credits. My credits never roll. My movie just keeps going. As I grapple with my new unavoidable state of being, I have tried to use my weakness as a strength and find a comfortable way of getting closer to that fire. I've come up with a list of things I want my son to know. These are meant to be road signs to help him determine where he wants to go and spot signs of danger. One thing I'm trying to do differently than my parents is not telling him where he should go, but telling him how to get there safely, with only the cuts and bruises that are necessary to brave the fire. I will give him the tools to cut his own path without accidentally losing a limb in the process. In some cases, it means showing him my own scars and being able to say, this is the mistake I made. Here are the choices I could have made instead. It is not my place to tell him which of those choices he should make, but it is my place to tell him what may result from each choice and let him determine the costs and benefits that match the goals he's chosen for himself. Then I watch from the bleachers as he runs. And then after, I meet him at the finish line and ask him the questions to decide how he might run the same course differently or run a different route next time. I am not his coach, nor is he my trophy. I am just a spectator that cares enough to hear his concerns and ask him what he wants next time. According to Charles Bukowski, what matters most is how well you walk through the fire. Fire is chaotic and unpredictable. It keeps you warm and safe, but it also burns you. We need fire, and yet fire causes us great risk. What better metaphor exists for parenthood? I have been learning this every day since becoming a parent. Every day is a walk through that fire, and some days it burns, but each burn is insignificant when compared to a life that is quiet and cold. I wake up at 5:30 every morning and start dad duty, which means groggily trailing my son like a 12 o'clock shadow as he crawls through our apartment. Some morning he hands me one of his French language books to read. I stumble through each syllable, doing my best to enunciate and try to add some sort of inflection to entertain him long enough to sit still. Sometimes I'm lucky and we get through a few pages of the book until he closes it and drops it to the ground. And sometimes the book becomes a projectile. Then, around 6:30, we get him into the high chair for breakfast, usually yogurt and cottage cheese. Initially the breakfast my wife made for herself, but commandeered by our son, sitting upon his formally white throne. After coming home from sports, I'm back on dad duty until dinner. These are usually the funner hours where he laughs and smiles with me, and I entertain him by crab walking with him up and down the staircase until my back and quads are sore. Then I lift him up and squeeze him to my chest while he flails and screams with disappointment. When we return to our apartment, screams with disappointment when we return to our apartment. When my wife arrives home, he immediately launches towards her as though he just discovered the only remaining ramen in an empty 12-pack and gracefully demands he be picked up and held. Eventually, we get to his dinner time, where he demonstrates his knack for visual art all over his clothes and high chair, until we finally get to bath time, where he has fun, and then doesn't have fun, and then has fun again, and then doesn't have fun again, and eventually has a meltdown, until he has a new diaper and gets waltzed into his bedroom for bedtime. Day in, day out, 24/7, this is the life of a parent. But it is important to point out that in spite of my attempt to frame the arduous journey each day brings me, what matters isn't that I got through the day, but that I was present for my son each and every second that I'm there, and that I'm just as happy to be there as he is to have me there with him. The goal is not to reach the end when he's off to college or moving out and starting his career. What matters most is that we never leave each other's side through smiles and frowns until we get there. It is hard to walk through the fire sometimes. It is exhausting, and some days it makes me impatient and moody. But who we will be is made up of the memories that occur from now until we arrive. In the words of Joseph Campbell, the researcher who first wrote The Hero's Journey, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Of course, you first have to endure the cave and everything in it. I found it interesting that when writing this speech for you, I discovered that more than 3/4 of the quotes about fatherhood revolved around two specific things. First, that a father is intended to be an authority figure, a protector and an instructor, as much as, if not more than, a caretaker. Second, much of it revolves around legacy, around the future of a child, rather than that child's present time. It is a puzzle that I have seen in generations past. Being a father, for those like my father and grandfather, was a role to be played rather than a personal revelation. I don't say that to point out inadequacies. My father did as best he could under his circumstances and continues to do the best he can today, for which I will always be grateful. I mean that society has told us, as men, that our role is to be the person who tends the fire rather than warm ourselves beside it. This was likely a functional philosophy, one that emphasized a man's role as economic driver, as the labor force that provided for their family and their country. But society has changed. It has evolved in ways where that philosophy has become a little bit obsolete. Now I stare longingly at the videos and images my wife sends me of our son, and I show them off to say, look at this thing. How could something be so ridiculous and so adorable? I don't tell anyone he's going to make a great lawyer one day, nor do I insist that he's going to have to learn to walk on his own eventually. Instead, I bask in his innocence. I admire him the way he is right now, today. And in that moment, I am completely vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, I am jarred awake in a particularly male way and feel the urge to step back and recompose. And yet, I don't want to. It doesn't suit me. And when I see how excited my dad is to spend time with my son, I realize I don't feel like waiting that 30 years until I get my turn to let my guard down. I've said before that you must know your role so that you can be good at the thing you do, but it always follows that by saying you can change your role once you understand how many different finish lines you could choose to cross. Before becoming a parent, my role was to improve my reputation, to succeed in my profession, and to establish my credibility. My role was centered on my future and no one else's. Now my role is far different. My role is centered on his present, to let him feel without being admonished, to let him guide me while he walks with his hands wrapped around my fingers. I am not directing or coaching him. I am just there while he lets me walk with him. To sit with him in his high chair when he throws a tantrum over the yogurt he has been given for dinner, and I smile and reassure him that tomorrow there will be new yogurt. As a colleague once said about an interaction with her son, I can see you're having big feelings, so I'm just going to put you in the car now. She was not correcting him. She was just there with him. Often when we walk, my son will suddenly stop just to look up at me and smile, and then go right back to walking straight ahead like he had never stopped. In that one single second, in between stretches of swift excitement, I am doing more than my role as a father. I am being vulnerable. I am not here for him, nor do I think he is here for me. We are with each other, and that's it. Douglas Adams once wrote, "Isn't it enough to see that a garden is beautiful without having to believe that there are fairies at the bottom of it too?" In other words, sometimes the purpose is just to be, with no forethought or reflection on what might become. But this is so much harder to do in the modern world when we have so many things occupying our attention. We are busy, and we are told we should be busy. However, being busy is a choice, and it is a choice of balancing what you want to be busy with up to the point that you can still provide for others' needs. You don't have to wait until you become a parent to learn this. It's just that becoming a parent makes this so much more painfully obvious. All we will have in our life are the moments we remember, and we never remember the moments that we're busy. We only remember the moments that we're not. The paradox is that vulnerability, the thing I once feared and avoided, has become the thing that fills my life with meaning. My goal isn't to get through the fire unscathed. My goal is to walk through it with my son together for as long as it burns.